All right, guys, hopefully that's going to brighten up a little bit. It's a little dark on the screen, but I think you guys can still see it. Let's go ahead and pray real quick. We're going to finish up this chapter, move on to the next one for next time. So hopefully everybody's doing all right. Hopefully you guys are staying safe. I know that the news isn't always reflective of a good situation, but I hope you guys are staying positive. So bow with me as we go to the Lord and ask for him to help us through this. Lord, I pray that you be with us today. I ask, Lord, that you keep us healthy, which is the most important thing. Help us, Lord, through this distance learning, this e-learning, whatever you want to call it, to continue to strive to understand this material. Help us to read. Help us to challenge ourselves, Lord, so that we can push towards a 3 or better on that AP exam. Lord, I just ask that you be with my class as they watch this. I pray, Lord, that they all tune in to watch it at some point today, and that you give them what they need to understand it. Lord, help them to contact me if they need to, and I just ask, Lord, that you bless them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, we're going to continue on with logging. We were talking about the way that we acquire timber and some of the methods that we use. Before that, we talked about clear cutting and selective cutting. Selective obviously being better than clear cutting, but the best way to log is actually what's called ecologically sustainable forestry, which is where you go in, you remove trees from a forest in ways that do not unduly affect the viability of other non-commercial tree species. Now here, listen, this is the best approach. It's also the approach that gives you the least amount of timber. It's the approach that is obviously the best for the environment in which that wood is harvested, but it's also very, very costly. So there's a lot of downsides. You don't see this a lot. I'll be honest, clear cutting is still a very viable means, and it's still very much used, especially when we put in place tree plantations. So the lumber industry is not dumb. They don't cut down trees and then leave that area, okay, just completely devoid of all trees. They plant trees in their place, okay? They are required by law, but it's also in their best interest to go back in after they clear cut an area and replant trees. They put in place these artificial forests, if you will. They are comprised of a single species of rapidly growing tree. A lot of times these are pine, guys. If you ever have done any woodworking, the two most common woods that you're going to buy, there's probably 3. There's cedar, there's the hardwoods, which is usually maple or oak, and then finally the most common is pine. Almost all the wood that you're going to use for your houses, that you're going to use for projects around the house, those are all going to be pine timber boards. The reason that it's pine is because pine grows really, like pine trees. Pine grows really fast. It's a relatively soft wood, so it's easy to mill and cut. It's just great for that purpose. So they'll go in and they'll basically plant a conifer forest, and that's nice. But do you think that all the animals that are living in that forest, that are living off the vegetation of maybe an old growth oak hickory forest, do you think that they're going to be accustomed to living in pine trees? Of course not. Okay, it's still going to be devoid of the kind of ecosystem. Is it going to have an ecosystem? Yes, it will. But it's going to be devoid of the rich ecosystem that it had before as an old growth forest. So tree plantations, while they seem like they're the best option, and we have these, by the way, not only for timber, but we have them for paper. The paper that you guys are hopefully writing these notes on is the same tree recipe, if you will, that we've been using for 100 years now. We have to have wood to create paper. That's just one example of the many uses of wood. So, I mean, wood is very much a vital resource. So having a tree plantation, I used to say to people, if I didn't recycle a piece of paper, I always recycle. But if you can't, I used to say to people, well, it's from a tree farm. It's from a tree plantation. So these trees were specifically grown for the purposes of being cut down. And while that's absolutely true, and it does kind of ease your conscience when it comes to maybe making a few more paper airplanes rather than utilizing that paper the way it should, at the same time, it's not ideal because it's those tree farms, just like a monocrop of corn that takes up acres and acres and acres, that is not the kind of habitat that most organisms thrive in, organisms thrive in natural habitats like old-growth forests. Now, does that mean that we should stop logging? We should stop planting tree farms? I don't know what that means. I really don't. I don't know the best option, the best sort of avenue on how to navigate through this craziness of having a need for something, but also it being detrimental to the environment. Again, we've talked about that before. I've come to that conclusion a lot. We need to figure out a better way to do it. So we talked about forestry. We talked about rangelands, basically things that we use land for. The other big use of land, of course, is residential use. Okay, it's for us to live, not only to have things like houses and backyards and stuff like that. I hope we all have that, but also to have communities, places with business, with shops, with places to go and spend money and have e-commerce or have commerce and have an economy within a system. I was just in Edwardsville yesterday. Ran out there to get something. Man, I don't even know what we had to get now. We were picking up food. We were trying to support local businesses when we can. Edwardsville is somewhat local, but we went out there to support a local eatery, and it amazes me because we were talking about the economics, me and my wife, the economics of Edwardsville, of the city, and how much it relies probably on the school. I mean, I argued to her that 25%, I bet, of the economy of Edwardsville is driven strictly by SIUE. But still, they have a very neat, very interesting, very eclectic little community with lots of different economic avenues, lots of businesses in Edwardsville, and seemingly more every year. And the reason they have that is because Edwardsville, like Bethalto, like Alton, is really kind of a suburb of St. Louis. These are areas around metropolitan areas with lower population density. So St. Louis has a relatively high population density. It has a high population. But Bethalto, for example, only has like 10,000 people. Alton has like 25,000 people. So we are relatively small in comparison, so we would be considered a suburb because we are in some ways connected to St. Louis. I think because we're on the Illinois side, we might not be in that suburb category. We might be an exurb. I'm honestly not sure how we're characterized. But I would argue that, just to give you two examples down here at the bottom, over on my left side, I don't know if it'll be switched in the video, but on my left here, left side of the screen, we have an image, maybe you guys have been there before, of St. Charles. St. Charles is a really neat suburb of St. Louis. It is very much connected to St. Louis. It is obviously then a suburb of St. Louis, excuse me. And people go there, and we're going to talk about urban sprawl here in a minute, but they are, hang on just a sec. They are influenced by the St. Louis economy, and they are a part of the urban sprawl of St. Louis that St. Louis is very much experiencing right now. Jerseyville, on the other hand, on the right-hand side, is on the Illinois side. It's north of us by about, for you guys, only about 10 minutes, but from Bethalto, it's about a 20 minute, probably 20 minute now with the highway, a 20-minute drive. Jerseyville, I would argue, is an exurb. It's like a suburb, but not connected to any city. So it's basically just a small town that's not surrounded by anything. Things like Highland, you could argue maybe Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon's kind of large. But Waterloo, Columbia, those would be exurbs. Again, those are all Illinois towns, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry to my St. Louis folks. All right, so the reason that we have exurbs in suburbs and why they're becoming so popular is because of the trend to move away from the city. So, and this is driven by what's called urban sprawl, which is the urbanization of areas, urbanized areas, moving into surrounding rural areas, basically blurring the lines between what was once rural and what is now metropolitan or city. Urban sprawl is basically moving out from the city. Now, why would you want to move away from the city? There's really three things, and they kind of go in line with one another. I would say the biggest driving force, though, the biggest driving factor is the cost of living. the cost of living is what is going to force most people out of the city. This enables urban sprawl, railroad or roadway construction, and this is the result of urban sprawl. So really, I guess this isn't all caused by, this is more the result, or what allows for urban sprawl, the cause of urban sprawl, and what results of urban sprawl. So let's start with cost of living, though, because that is the true cause, in my opinion. So number 2, it says the cost to live, or it costs much more to live in a metropolitan area. This is just true. I may have mentioned before, I had some friends who lived in Chicago, Illinois, when they were in college. I'm not sure how they afforded it, but they did. And when you went up there, I used to go up and visit. I went like twice, only when they were in college. But I'd go up there, and we'd go around the town, and we'd go out and stuff, and we'd try to have fun, and we'd eat out for dinner, and everything in Chicago is more expensive. It just absolutely is. I don't see that as much in St. Louis because St. Louis is kind of an older city, and it's not as popular, I wouldn't think. It's not as populated either. But definitely in Chicago, or in Louisville, which is another city that I lived in for a little bit, if you bought things there, it costs more than if you bought outside of the city. And the main thing for that is living space, like a home, a condo, an apartment. I have an example here. I've used New York before, but Manhattan obviously is probably the most extreme example of this. Manhattan costs $1,773 per square foot on average. That's a square foot. Again, if you can remember the tiles in this room, I'm sure we've all forgotten, but the tiles in this room are 1 square foot. So right now I am standing in 1 tile, okay, and my feet are together. Right, so if you can imagine me standing up here on 1 tile. In New York City, this would cost this little tile of living space. If I was in an apartment or something like that, this would cost $1,773. Okay, I just moved up to another tile. That's another $1,773. Moved over to another tile. That's another $1,773. It's a lot of money. It's a ridiculous amount. So much so that it drives people away from this place. In droves. Lots of people move, and they still work in the city. Obviously, New York is a huge metropolitan area. It is a driving economic force in the United States because of just what it is as a city. But a lot of people don't live there. In fact, I've showed you guys before, there's this mass migration of individuals in the morning to Manhattan, and then in the afternoon leaving Manhattan. So, and the reason for that is because property in New Jersey, just across a river, averages at its most. This is the most expensive property in New Jersey. It averages at $598 a square foot. You can get cheaper, but $598 a square foot. This is way less than half. I don't know what the percentage is, but less than half the cost of Manhattan. So for 40% of the cost, something like that, you can get the same amount of square foot, or you can get double the amount of square foot as you could in New York City, or in particularly Manhattan. So because of that large thing, and by the way, that's not just square footage. Everything costs more in a city. If you go and you buy a pack of soda, a 12-pack of soda, it's going to cost more in Manhattan than it is in New Jersey. That's just true. Because of this high cost, we have a desperate requirement, a desperate need for roadways. And because of the Highway Trust Fund, which was started by the Highway Revenue Act of 1956, we have this expanding and ever expanding, constantly changing network of roads that enable driving, that enable mobility between one place to another, transportation from point A to point B. This has made it possible. So roadways, the cost of living in certain areas has made people reconsider living in other areas where it's a lot cheaper. Roadways have made it possible for individuals to commute from one place to the next. And because of these two things working in conjunction, you have what's called urban blight. Okay? And I would argue that St. Louis has experienced its fair share of urban blight. This is where people move away from the city, and with them they take their resources, their income potential, their desire to see their community thrive. They take that with them to their new area. So I showed you guys St. Charles a second ago. A lot of people are moving towards that area of St. Louis, St. Charles being a suburb of St. Louis. And you'll notice, like the Delmar Loop, Chesterfield, all of these are areas surrounding St. Louis metropolitan area, or downtown St. Louis, but they're nowhere near it. They are, I mean, in some cases, miles and miles and miles away. It takes a long time for me to drive from here to Delmar. Okay, even in downtown St. Louis, it takes like 20 minutes. Like, I'm not even joking. In downtown St. Louis, it takes about 20 minutes to get to the Delmar Loop. Okay, I think it might be more like 25. I don't know, 20 to 25. You're talking about a huge span of area there that you have to traverse. Now, you can do it. It's not that hard because of the expansive roadways that we have. But because of that, because of people moving out to the Chesterfield area, to the St. Charles area, to Delmar Loop and places like that, you see the rundown of some of the inner city area, because basically the influence, the money, the financials, the individuals are not living there. They're not investing in that community. And the best example I have of that is probably, and it's also sad, it really does upset me, is North County. In particular, this in the right-hand corner, I don't know if you guys have been there, it's kind of blurry to see, but this is Crown Candy Kitchen. This whole area is somewhat depleted, and it's because people don't live there anymore, because people have moved away. Crown Candy Kitchen is in constant fear of shutting down. It's been around for like, I think, over 100 years. Me and my wife go to this place once a year on our anniversary. On our anniversary, we try to go once in the summer too, so usually once or twice a year, I should say. We make it out to Crown Candy Kitchen, and the reason we do it is not because of the food. It's because of the milkshakes. That's right, me and my wife are fat together. We love going there just for what they call a St. Louis malt. If you haven't tried it, go and enjoy it. It's amazing, especially before this place closes down. I hope it doesn't close down. I hope it stays there for another 100 years. But it's in the constant fear of shutting down, because it's in an area that is not desired by individuals. And I know that because people have moved away from this particular suburb of St. Louis in droves. The population in North County, especially in this area where Crown Candy Kitchen is so depleted, it's ridiculous. It's just empty building after empty building when you go there. And the main reason for that is because of urban sprawl. So urban sprawl is the result of this once thriving community shutting down. And it really has shut down. That is probably one of the few mainstays, one of the few establishments that has weathered this urban sprawl phenomenon as well as it has, but it's only holding on barely at this point. All right, so in response to urban sprawl and just the development of cities as a whole, we try to, and by the way, like I said, guys, urban sprawl didn't exist before the advent of the automobile, before the advent of better roads, because you just couldn't drive. You couldn't take a horse and go that far. So people were confined to a very particular area. But that's not the case anymore. So we have to plan accordingly. We have to think about the expanse of our communities, and we have to take into account what is going to be desirable, what we're doing to grow smart rather than just letting it happen as it may. So urban sprawl can increase induced demand. That is an idea in which an increase in supply of goods causes demand to grow, which is so counterintuitive, because most economics class will tell you that if supply goes up, demand goes down. However, that's not always the case. An example of this is the larger, better roadways. If you build a better road from, let's say, St. Charles to downtown St. Louis, where a lot of people still work, if you build a better road system from that point to the point A to point B, from St. Charles to St. Louis, obviously more people are going to be tempted to then live in St. Charles and commute to St. Louis to work. So by doing something good for the community, you're actually increasing urban sprawl. You don't even realize that you're doing it, but you're doing it by induced demand. You're creating a better situation for people to commute rather than just live within the city. Zoning can help address this by separating industry, business, and residential areas. Every part of a city is zoned. Bethalto, I know I talk about Bethalto a lot, but it's where I live. Bethalto is interesting because the main street of Bethalto is 140. It's the main highway that runs through it. Every area on either side of that highway is zoned as commercial property. You can build a business there. Okay, Prairie Street's another one of that. In Bethalto, there's this another central street that has businesses on either side. It's zoned for business. But in my neighborhood where I live, okay, it's just houses because it's zoned residential. And they do that to try and stop or ease this induced demand. Now, why is this so important? And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, this is going to be our last slide today, which is going to take us to right about 25 minutes, which is usually what I shoot for. So thank you guys for watching today. But this is really just some vocab. I want you guys to go through and read this, but I did want to give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about here. First off, I want you to understand that you are a stakeholder in your community. You may not feel like one right now, because I didn't when I was in high school. But as soon as you start paying property tax, and if you live in Illinois, I believe Missouri still has property tax as well. But if you live in Illinois, you guys are going to become acutely familiar with what I'm talking about. You will become a stakeholder. You will care about how that property tax is allocated. And why do I say that? Because I pay more in property tax than I pay for my mortgage, like the principal on my mortgage. I think I pay more than the principal and the interest combined. My property tax is ridiculous. And that's not just me complaining. It's just true across the board in Illinois, especially in Madison County, though. It's really high. So because of that, because I'm paying so much in to the property tax, I expect that my community thrive. And sometimes it does in certain ways, and sometimes it doesn't. But I would love to see it do really well, because I hope that the money that I'm putting into it, pouring into it, is being well handled. So I'm interested in smart growth, and so will you be. Like I said, once you start to pay taxes on these things, which focuses on development of sustainable, healthy communities. I want to see Bethalto, if I end up staying there, I want to see Bethalto thrive. I want to see it do well. I want to see it expand. I want to see its roads be paved, potholes fixed, police force well equipped, fire station. I want to see all of those things, all those intangibles put in place in an effective and meaningful way. Okay, and I hope all communities probably strive for smart growth. Now, some communities have a sense of place. I would argue that there's some of that here in Alton, definitely, with it being such a historic town. I would say there's even some of that in Bethalto. There's a sense of pride in graduating from CM, if you will. I hope there's a sense of pride in graduating from Marquette. But I think some cities have a better idea of sense of place than others. One of the examples in the book was New Orleans. Obviously, New Orleans, with its French Quarter, with its very interesting Cajun French cuisine, with its French history, it's a very strange place. That very much has a sense of place, a feeling that should be an area, that an area has a distinct and meaningful character. There's a lot of character in New Orleans. But the one that I have down here, this picture, this image, these two images, this is not of New Orleans. It is another French settlement, though. This is Louisville, Kentucky. I have told you guys before, hopefully you remember, I lived in Louisville for 2.5 years, something like that. It was a great experience. My wife and I would go back in a heartbeat if it wasn't for the fact that we have kids. And again, the cost of living here is relatively high. But it's a beautiful town, and it has a ton of character. It has a ton of that sense of place. It's a really small city. It has this walking path. See that bridge there. There's another one on the just to the left of that. It's a walking path. You can walk from one side of the river to the next. My wife and I have done that multiple times. There are these fleur de lis, which is a French symbol for a lily flower, all over the city. It's sort of the national symbol or the city symbol of Louisville, Kentucky. And again, you'll see these a lot too in in any sort of French city, but in New Orleans as well. They have this thriving downtown. It's just a really cool place to live. And everywhere you look, again, you have these fleur-de-lis, you have this walking path, you have the Kentucky Derby, which is just this huge event. You have Derby Week, the week before that, which starts with this giant fireworks show, the largest fireworks show in North America. You have just all of these events that surround the city that are just really interesting and really cool. And it gives it this sense of place, much more so than what I've seen in a lot of other cities. When I think of a sense of place in St. Louis, I think of like the Cardinals and the Blues. We put a lot of that emphasis on sports, I feel like, where cities like New Orleans or Louisville, they put it on just the culture of the city. There's a lot of bumper stickers in Louisville that will say, "Keep Louisville weird." And I'm not really sure who came up with that slogan, but you find it everywhere in the city. At least you did when I lived there. And I think that's kind of one of the sense of places of Louisville, Kentucky, is that they want it to be this eclectic, strange place where all sorts of different people kind of coexist and enjoy the city for what it is. So some places have this a lot more than others. Again, I think it's really a cool idea, a really cool thing. So, guys, we're going to end there. I'm going to continue to talk. That was the end of this chapter, but we're going to go on to the next chapter. Next time, there'll probably be a quiz somewhere in there. I don't know if I'll do it next time. I might just continue with notes next time. But I hope you guys are staying well. I will see you next time. Bye.